Is that?
No, actually, when I look at you, it's Haley on the left and Gavin on the right.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
They show you the inverted one because that's the only way you can do your hair. And that's for Chris's sake. He's always this number here. But
there we go. We should always put ladies first anyway.
Well, in this case, it also shows up with the order in which you appear. So that's why we want to do that. Good. Yeah, super.
And Chris, are you ditching the sunglasses? Chris, are you going to ditch the sunglasses because
I can't see one way or the other, so
I just fear it makes you look like you're not really taking it.
If you prefer, I'd like to put on my sunglasses. I don't actually need them, but I would like to. So I don't think the glasses do much one way or the other. By the way, if you're just asking as you're looking in, the problem is it's still dark on your eyes. So yeah, I think you might as well keep the glasses.
It allows me to see the screen better, believe it or not.
Oh, bifocal sunglasses. Who knew? Just this.
So I don't know. Does that
glasses are better?
Glasses are
fine
because you're squinting to when you don't.
Yeah, I'll be squinting. Yeah.
You look uncomfortable. There's no point making the audience.
Well, I'm always uncomfortable. So there's that. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Consultants Saying Things. I am Chris Lockhart, joined today by Oliver Cronk, Whynde Keene, Phil Yanoff, and special guests, Dr. Haley Dare and Gavin Richardson. We've been having a conversation a couple of times, and it's come up in a couple of different contexts around this idea of mental resiliency and the psychology aspects of going with a career such as consulting, which can be, quite full of pressure and various choices that may or may not be at odds with your own internal ethics and value systems. And so in the past, we've actually talked about these things from the perspective of our own histories, our own experiences and anecdotes, with always the caveat that, we're not mental health professionals. We don't do this professionally. So take that with a grain of salt. I thought, and I think we all agreed, it might be a fantastic idea if we actually had some actual professionals who do this for a living actually come on and help us talk some of these things through. So as you can see, I'm working on my mental health here in my resiliency. But, Phil, I know we've talked about this a couple of times and, always the, why are we talking about this? What can people get out of this? Yeah, you said it so well earlier in pre-roll. I was wondering if you might give it a shot here with 2 minutes of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think this matters, right? Because as a consultant, you've got your own life and it's got its own uncertainty wrapped up in it. But now you've got, the uncertainty of your professional life on top of it and trying to balance it. And then your professional life includes not just coworkers, but clients and their demands. And you've got this whole physically demanding environment. You might not be waking up in your own bed. You travel and time zones and lots of things could be impacting the way you deal with the world. And I just think that building resilience is important. It's a valuable thing. And if you've got it, that means you wake up in the morning and you're ready to go to work, right? And if you don't have it, you know that you wake up and it's a drag and you are dreading the day because you don't have that energy that you thought you wanted to have. You don't have what you need to get going. So how can we be resilient in the face of adversity and uncertainty? And that's why I think we've got some folks in to help us figure that part out, because I think here's the bad news is, yeah, we've got some challenging jobs. The good news is there are tools out there to help us be better at this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And let's get our experts on roll here. Haley, welcome. Gavin, welcome. You guys work for Neurotransmitters. Can you tell us a little bit about what you guys do? And then I wanted to sort of get your thoughts. I know you maybe have watched some of the stuff we've done in the past, and you may be able to tell us where we're wrong.
There's one or two little ones that we picked up last time, but most of it was very straightforward. Haley and I have been working together for 7 years now. And for most of that time, we've been doing advisory work, consulting, learning and development programs with both government departments and corporations. And we developed a client base that's pretty diverse. About 3 years ago, we realized that actually within those clients, we were only touching a very small fraction of their employee population. And so we set about digitizing what we do. And over the last 3 years, we've been building, essentially, it's a mental health and wellbeing portal that organizations can use as an intranet site, a microsite on their intranet effectively. It's cloud-based, it's externally hosted, but essentially it covers a massive range of learning and development within organizations. So it combines very compelling and dynamic e-learning journeys, which are animations, videos, quizzes, questionnaires, very interactive, an extensive resource library of digital documents, PDF one-pagers, templates, etc. But also overlaying that, what we are doing is a year-round set of events. And we're bringing experts in from Haley's networks, those true professional experts, to talk in the corporate and government environment. Why are we able to do that? Well, I'll pass over to Haley because she's got almost 30 years. I never go over 30 years and I never will. Almost 30 years as a consultant, clinical and forensic psychologist.
Yes, that's giving my age away. Yeah, I am. I sometimes describe myself as an old bag, but that's because I've worked in the field of mental health for a long time. It's always been my passion, and I've been very fortunate to work with many of the world's experts. In fact, in my very early days, I was very fortunate to meet Professor Tim Beck, who very sadly passed away earlier this year, but I met him in my very early days, and we then became lifelong friends, actually. I'm a...
Before you go on, Tim Beck actually invented cognitive behavioral therapy. So he's the godfather of CBT.
CBT, yes. Absolutely.
And
yes,
normally we have to put a caveat on this that we are not experts, but here I think we can safely say that we are expert, or at least we have experts here with us. And yeah, I mean, that's incredible, right? I mean, normally it's just us riffing on sort of things that we've seen and done. And here it is like, no, CBT, I've worked with I know a little bit about it. I worked with, right? So
we're best friends.
Yeah, we went to the theatre together in London. Most of my books behind are written little notes from him. So anyway, but I'm a consultant clinical psychologist. As Gavin said, I also worked extensively in the field of forensic psychology as well. So that's probably enough about me, but and indeed about us. But one of the key points I picked up there, Phil, that you spoke about was working in the field of consultancy. And you spoke about uncertainty. And one of the issues about working with uncertainty is actually the pressures it puts on our brain. Now, our brain finds it more challenging to deal with uncertainty than it does the worst case scenario. So when we are presented with difficult news, the worst case scenario, we're able to take on board that news. And once we've processed it, we can start to problem solve around it. We can start to deal with issues. But when we're dealing with uncertainty, part of our brain, known as the amygdala, that's our brain's natural alarm center, it goes into overdrive and it releases cortisol, which is our neurotransmitter, which is involved in our survival mechanism. And it goes a bit into overdrive. And the problem with uncertainty is we don't quite know what challenges we're having to face. So it's much harder to prepare for things. So it makes things such as planning quite difficult. We're not quite so able to think around how we might deal with issues. And so our brain goes a bit more into hypervigilance, and we find things much more challenging. So that's one of the difficulties that as consultants you're having to manage all the time.
Haley, what's, if you don't mind, what's the outcome of that? How does that manifest itself? Does that turn into anxiety, or does that turn into how do people react to that biological thing going on in their brain?
Well, essentially, it's more commonly known as stress, but it can manifest in a whole range of different ways. So some people might become quite irritable and snappy. Other people might become quite introverted. So they might shut down quite a bit. They might stop communicating with people around them. Other people might become quite angry. So it can manifest in a whole range of different ways. It can have quite a physical effects on our body. So we do know that it can be physically very detrimental to our physical health as well as our mental health. So there are lots of different ways in which it can start to manifest. And we just need to start to become aware of that. But the good thing is there are things that we can do to manage it and to become aware of it.
I think, sorry, if I can jump in here, it feels like that's compounded though as well by the fact that often consultants are dropped in situations where perhaps they don't have all the background knowledge that perhaps sometimes the consulting firm is suggesting that maybe they do have to the client. And so, many people suffer with imposter syndrome, even when they're very experienced. But when you've been dropped in the deep end, as we were saying earlier, when you've got an unfamiliar town that perhaps, or city that you're working from, that you've traveled to, that's surely talk to us, go and Haley, a little bit about that imposter syndrome sort of piece and how that must be a factor as well.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing here is we can all experience imposter syndrome. I know we often talk about this syndrome, but it's actually to do with our self-esteem, our lack of confidence. I know these days everybody likes to put it into the context of a syndrome, but it is about how it feeds into our sense of achievement. Are we going to be able to complete that task to the best of our ability? And as you say, if we suddenly plunged into something and we don't know, have we got all the tools, the techniques, have we got the team around us to help us achieve that? When we don't quite know whether we're in the full kind of picture, we fully know what we have to deal with, then that can feed into those little self-doubts, which we can all experience. So it's not necessarily just confined to consultants. It can affect any one of us, including psychologists.
So basically anyone who's human, got it, check.
Absolutely.
We tend to put the lens of obviously consulting on everything that we talk about. Is there anything about like that particular industry that you think might be, more or less stressful? I mean, we talked about uncertainty, but that sort of attracts some people that like uncertainty, that for lack of a better term, perform well with uncertainty, right? That people can take that in and use that as something to perform with. Is it just consulting? Maybe it's other industry. Maybe it's medicine. I don't know, right?
Yeah, I think so. It takes a certain drive, so it's not just confined to consultants at all. And many of us are particularly driven, and so we like particularly pressured either jobs or environments in which to work. It won't suit everybody. And so it's really important that we start to become aware of what our traits are, what things work well for us, what our skills and our assets are. So we need to become aware of those things that we're good at and those things we're not so good at. So certain professions will probably attract certain particular with a certain skill set. And it might be sometimes we have to do a trial and error. So sometimes we might try something and actually realize that's not quite the area for me. Or it might be that perhaps we are promoted into a position of management and then we realize, do you know what? I'm not quite management material. That's okay. We just have to then work out what is the right professional skill set for us.
And we've talked about this before, Whynde. I know you and I have talked about this around, the type A personality that is typical stereotype, right? Trope of a consultant is this guy or girl that is so driven, right? Sort of like pushing other people out of the way to get to the top. It seems like maybe the profession attracts people that, I don't know, maybe it's a brain defect. Maybe we have like going on up there.
I really think it is. To your point, and even Haley, what you're saying around the traits and the skills and the assets, I think people are attracted to that. We've had podcasts with young consultants and we see those traits, we see that drive. Now, where people, and Haley, to your point about it's a little bit trial and error, some people will keep thriving on this throughout their career, like some of us. And some people might say, you know what, this is not for me, or I'm going to move into other things. What I think is also interesting is, particularly in our digital world and our awareness around, future of work, how the conditions of the consulting environment are actually going to shift. I just read a headline today from a really big firm on the Uberification of consulting and allowing people to have, more control over their schedules, just as one example.
Going on your brain defect point, though, after what Haley described as being some of the anxiety and the stress, it does make me wonder whether some consultants perhaps in the process of dealing with that stress and that anxiety almost turn off bits of their system in a way. And again, this is where Haley's here to correct me in my mumbo jumbo I'm about to say. But in order surely to deal with some of those stressful situations, perhaps some undesirable behaviours can kind of result. And we were talking about memes in another episode and some of the sociopathic sort of tendencies, the kind of rather cavalier, Machiavellian sort of tendencies of certain consultants. And maybe I'm just sort of hypothesis here. I'll be really interested in Haley and Gavin's view. Maybe that's because they've almost had to dealing with that inner voice. And they've had to silence that inner voice in a way that maybe then makes them behave in a way that other people look at and go, wow, that's not a very nice human being to have to interact with.
I think I'm going to relate it back to something we heard in the previous podcast that Phil actually said, protecting the asset, or not protecting the asset was the term, but we went on to talk about protecting the asset. And I think most people ignore the fact that the asset we're talking about here is our brain. And our brains are all different. They may look the same if we took them out and put them on a table, but actually they're all different. They've all got a different architecture, and they've all got a different chemical balance, and they've all got different electrical signals going out throughout the brain. So we're all different. And I think there is probably a certain architecture that lends itself to consulting. And it may be to do with logical thinking. There's a certain architecture that actually lends itself to being in the caring professions. There's a certain architecture that lends itself to being, and we develop these architectures from when we're born. And our architecture develop all the way through our lives. As long as we continue learning, we're continually developing neural pathways in our brains regarding what we're learning and putting it into practice. And there was a piece that resonated again from the previous one where you said, Oliver, you really struggled 4 or 5 years ago when you went into a managerial role. When you look at that, your architecture wasn't ready for that role. You struggled because you didn't have the architecture to do it immediately, but you had to learn how to do it. And over a period of time, months, you became much more comfortable and effective because your architecture had actually grown in your brain to do that role. So the reason you were struggling was because your brain wasn't ready for it. But 6 months later, you talked it out, you'd learned how to do it, you became a lot more comfortable doing it. Your architecture had changed. And it's the same in anything new we learn.
Well, now you're challenging a sort of a long-held belief of mine that sometimes I flippantly say, people don't change. They're fundamentally. So what you're suggesting, though, is that, Oliver in that particular case had the ability to adapt and create new neural pathways and create a new logical architecture in his brain that allowed him to deal with that new set of activities and the stresses and emotions and everything that go with it. Or maybe I just made that up. Is that what I heard? That's what I heard.
Coming back to Haley's point, Oliver could have said, actually, this doesn't suit me. I'm going to go back and do something else. And that plays to the career choices you were asking about earlier, Chris. If Oliver hadn't adapted and moved into that role and grown into that role and changed his architecture, he might have gone, I'm going to do something else. And equally, there are people out there that probably want to be a consultant, come into consulting in their 20s, and a year later go, it's not for me because they haven't got the architecture. And maybe as we get a little bit older, consultants drop out in the 30s or 40s because actually they've just had enough. It's time to move on and do something else and learn new skills somewhere else. and develop their architecture in a different way.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. And there's a couple of points then that I want to make that kind of validate that, because I haven't just made that flip from individual contributor to I've also done the reverse. And actually coming to Tanium, I've actually I influence and I have virtual leadership, but I don't have a team anymore. And so actually the first few months at Tanium were really, really hard, because I was then, doing stuff myself without not delegating as much. And the other point I'd make is in consulting, senior hires, kind of industry hires, not people in their 30s, 40s who had experience in particular industries or particular skill sets. The success rate for onboarding those into a major big four that I was working for at the time wasn't great. There are a lot of people would maybe survive 6 months to a year and then they'd leave because they just could not adapt. And so that really speaks to, I think, how perhaps malleable or changeable that person was able to sort of, adapt to that situation. For some people, you're right, it wasn't for them. And so they went back to industry roles again.
So, so that's an example of reacting to the situation. Are there, for those people that find themselves in a situation, and are not looking at 6 months worth of adapting to a new role or something, they're just in a situation. What are some tools? Like Phil, I know you're deep into stoicism and that those types of philosophy, which we've talked about before as ways of managing your career and stresses and things like that. I don't know. Are there other? Is that an appropriate tool? Are there other tools? What would you recommend to folks in terms of, find a hobby, go on vacation?
Shall I go or shall you go? I think we talked about the architecture, but another part of our daily lives is the chemical balance in our brains. We've all got neurotransmitters or brain chemicals in our brains and our nervous system in our bodies that govern the way we feel. And when we talk about stress, it's cortisol, and you've probably all heard of cortisol, but actually there are other hormones and chemicals that we need to keep in balance. If cortisol, the stress hormone, goes too high, it pushes down the hormones that are associated with self-esteem, which is serotonin. It pushes down the hormones that are associated with pleasure, which is dopamine. And it pushes down oxytocin, which is relating to human bonding and relationships. So again, when we get stressed and we tend to snap at people, it's because our stress levels have gone up. But at the same time, our human bonding relationship chemicals have gone down. So there's a counterbalance between the feel-good chemicals and those that put us at risk.
I think there's a whole combination of things that you can do. And so one of the things we really advocate are making small changes. So, 1% change every day, as up to 37% across a year. Because we all know everyone has very busy schedules. So if you can make very small changes and start integrating them into your daily regime, and what we do is focus very much on trying to we focus on 7 of these key neurotransmitters. That is a way of starting to build up your resilience and really focus on mental hygiene. Because we all focus on physical hygiene. So every day, everyone cleans their teeth, they shower, and they launder their clothes. But what we're not so good at doing is focusing very much on our mental hygiene, looking after our mental health every day. So by integrating small techniques every day into our daily regime, we're protecting our mental health, we're restoring our mental health, but we're also building our resilience. And by building our resilience, protecting our resilience, then when we're facing these challenges in the workplace or outside of the workplace, we're then better equipped to deal with life's challenges as they come along.
So is there a pill? Just like all the
what you just said.
There's a formula. There is a formula of how you do it.
There are pills too, but we like to work on a huge big toolkit of things. Yeah. And if you have a big So I like to think of it as a psychological toolkit. And the more tools you have in your bag, then you can access those tools at all different times. So, for example, when you're on holiday, you might want to access different tools. When you're in the working week, then there might be different tools that you might use then. When you're in the evening, you might want to use different tools then. But it is about building a set of tools and techniques that work for you, and you can integrate them into your daily regime. So we tend to, one of the things we focus really heavily on is starting the day off in the right way. So one of the first things we talk about is, this will go down well, is keeping your mobile phone, first of all, out of the bedroom, and not looking at it for the first 30 minutes, 45 minutes of the day. So most, you see, most people, when you ask most people.
Why would I want to do that?
Right. There's something we all experience. It's called sleep inertia. Sleep inertia is that grogginess that we all feel when we wake up. And some mornings we wake up and it lasts 10 minutes. Other mornings we wake up and an hour later we're still feeling groggy. It's called sleep inertia. And what happens?
I want to challenge you, Gavin, on that, because I'm speaking for myself, but I leap straight out of bed and put my pants on, like both legs at once.
Right.
And I'm ready to go.
Let me tell you why your brain is not working fully, Chris. Whilst you're sleeping, all the blood.
Wow, I've been wanting to do that for a long time. So now finally someone's going to explain to him what's going on.
From a medical perspective.
All the blood while you're sleeping goes to the back of your brain. And it takes about 30 minutes for the blood to replenish throughout your brain and reach your prefrontal cortex. Now, for the first 30 minutes every day, your amygdala, which is your brain's alarm system, is the one that stimulates.
It's the lizard brain, right? Isn't that?
Yes, yeah. But it stimulates cortisol. Now, the problem you've got while your prefrontal cortex is still snoozing before it gets the blood is that the prefrontal cortex is your executive function, it's your rationale, it's your logic. So anything you feed into your brain during the first 30 minutes raises your cortisol levels in excess of where they may react to, because your logical brain isn't working at that point in time.
So what do you do for that? Coffee?
So you switch off digital.
Yeah. So what you have to do is you either have to get up earlier. So
what if that's not practical?
So the idea is that you go back to old-fashioned alarm clocks. You don't use your mobile phone as an alarm clock. And you just allow your brain to have that. We're just talking about 30 minutes here, to allow your brain to wake up fully. And then you can start accessing your phone and look at emails, or you can start looking at social media, whatever else. But it's about priming your brain in the right way. You wouldn't wake up in the morning and start drinking a triple vodka. Well. Some might. So we wouldn't advocate that. So in the same way, we want to protect. And it does go back to Phil's comment from the previous podcast that you're doing about this is about protecting the most important asset you've got, and that's your brain. So by not looking at your mobile phone first thing in the morning, just 30 minutes, you're protecting your brain and you're allowing your brain to wake up naturally.
Are there activities or apps or exercises? Does stretching help? How do I? If I want to get it down to 30 minutes, I want to get it down to 15 minutes. Are there ways I can?
No. There's three further key things that we recommend first thing in the morning. And one of them is exercise or activity or stretching or going for a walk. Use the first 30 minutes to go for a walk, because what you're doing by going for a walk is you're stimulating a great cocktail of feel-good chemicals. You're getting endorphins, you're getting dopamine, you're burning up adrenaline. It's a good thing to do. So you use that first 30 minutes to go for a walk. Practice mindfulness. You're increasing GABA, which is to do with relaxation. But in mindfulness, whether it's in the shower, drinking your mind a mindful cup of coffee, practice mindfulness first thing in the morning. The other thing that's absolutely key first thing in the morning is to get outside and get some daylight, because daylight stimulates our serotonin levels. And serotonin is our feel-good chemical. It's associated with self-esteem, self-confidence. And I can ask you a question, Chris. I bet it feels really good to be out in the sunshine on the beach, doesn't it?
I gotta tell you, I feel like Superman right now.
Right, because you're getting a massive boost of serotonin right now because you're getting maximum daylight.
There may be another reason there, Gavin.
it could be, you know, the hydration as well. But essentially outside, finishing off that point, outside you get at least 25 times more light exposure than you do in a very well-lit office. On the beach where Chris is, it's likely he's getting about 200 to 250 times more light exposure than you will in a well-lit office. Lots of serotonin.
Okay, so that's all right. So I get it. There's chemicals, right? It's not just about your attitude. There are things in your brain structurally, right? And there are some things that we can do in the morning to sort of stimulate and prepare for the day. You know, I think we talked about in previous episodes, right? And you know, ways in which of coping with stress that is already emergent, right? It's the middle of the day now. I'm going from meeting to meeting. I'm really irritated and pissy because I haven't had my lunch or whatever the case may be. What are some ways in which I need to deal with that after I'm already in the stressful situation?
Okay, so there's a really simple technique, which whenever I talk about this, I can see the cynicism in people's face. And it's just something called diaphragmatic breathing. But diaphragmatic breathing will, and no matter how stressed, so if people are in the middle of a panic attack, this will stop a panic attack happening. So you can be in extreme forms of stress at the time, but diaphragmatic breathing is something that you can use as a preventative method, but also in the midst of extreme stress. And nobody need know that you're using it. So it's a really useful tool and technique to learn. There's lots of different ways you can learn it. I teach what's known as a 4-4-8 technique. So you breathe in through your nose to the count of 4, you hold your breath to the count of 4, and then you breathe out slowly through your mouth to the count of 8. Now, the reason that we teach diaphragmatic breathing is there's a chemical change that happens in your body. So it basically reduces the amount of oxygen that you're taking into your body. So the blood pH changes, it slows your heart rate down, it reduces your blood pressure. There's huge health benefits, which you can Google about. But it will reduce your cortisol levels. And just a few minutes of this will actually start to baseline your cortisol levels. So it's a really simple technique. If you're sat in the middle of a meeting with live people, you can actually do this and nobody need know you're actually doing it. So you can do it anywhere, and it's a really simple technique to use. But as I say, even if you're in the midst of a panic attack, it's a technique to be able to use, and it will start to calm you down and stop you having that panic attack.
I mean, from a stress point, I mean, the idea was, how do I live a flourishing life? That is one of the things that's kind of the hallmark of later Stoicism, right? How can I flourish in my life? And so they had lots to say about this kind of stuff. And, if you're, Haley and Gavin here, we started with the idea of CBT, right? But, a lot, if you can't open a CBT textbook without there being a quote from Epictetus occurring in the first couple of pages. It's there every time. He's in every book. So, of course, Epictetus was really Albert Ellis's REBT, kind of started that bit off. And then Temkin comes on and builds on, and make CBT, right? So it's everywhere. It's just kind of baked in that, look, I would like to lead a flourishing life. Now, the beauty you have when you've got Haley and Gavin and CBT is they took all these ideas and they said, well, let's go put it in a lab and let's measure this and see if it actually works for people and what works and what doesn't work and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that's kind of where we are with this right now. It's like, yeah, I mean, I'm hoping to be in a state of ataraxia. Let me tell you, I'm still a struggler. But the idea is, what are there tools like this? And this is why we bring them on, is to say, okay, well, let's give us some ideas of some things we can do. If you gave me the mic for a second, I would like to ask a question on of them is how do you help people assess what their state of resilience is, right? I mean, how do you help them understand, because when we're talking about this, when I feel like I'm talking about it, first I got to realize I got a problem. And I might have all kinds of problems. How do I realize that resilience is one of those things I want to work on? What do you see as presenting symptoms typically?
Mm. So there's a couple of things I just want to pick up on it. So first of all, one of the things, because with Stoicism too, is about that not all stress is bad. So first of all, it's really important to acknowledge the role of eudaimonic stress. So eudaimonic stress comes from the Greek word eudaimonia, which means flourishing. So there are certain types of stress which actually motivate us to perform at our very best. And as a society, we focus really heavily on the negative aspects of stress, but actually, and this is important, particularly with consultancy, that's what actually enables us to do our job well. So it's important that we utilize stress to our advantage. What we don't want, and this then picks up a little bit more on your question really, is when stress starts to have that more negative impact on us. So that's when we start to see symptoms manifesting. Now, sometimes we can recognize it in ourselves, and that might be where we do start to notice, do you know what, I'm not quite myself, and that's where we start to become a bit snappy and a bit irritable. Or maybe it will take a partner or maybe somebody that we're working with, and they'll say, do you know, Hayley, you're really becoming quite irritable and snappy lately. Is there something going on? So it might
hypothetically, someone might say that.
Of course.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. But so sometimes we can just, and it might take for us to have a little bit of time out. It might be when we're actually having a break from work or something that we start to reflect a little bit more on things like that. But other times it might take for somebody around us. Now that could be a family member, a friend, or it could be actually one of our colleagues that starts to notice that perhaps they just notice we're not quite our normal selves. And that's we do an awful lot of work there about how to reach out to somebody in a compassionate way, in a caring way. And that's because we do care, just to sort of say, do you know, I don't think you quite see yourself lately. Is everything okay? And it's about how to have those conversations. And those conversations are so important. It's about normalizing that conversation, how to reach out to somebody, because it's not as easy as just saying, oh, here's a scale. Sometimes there are measures that we can use, but in everyday terms, it's not as easy as that. And it's generally just recognizing the individual. You will know people that you work with, you know how they present day to day. And generally you will pick up those close to you when you think things are starting to slip a little bit.
I mean, Hayley, what you're referring to there as well, I think is also referred to as mental health first aid in some cases, isn't it? Because I think people have helped me in the past who've been available to talk to in the workplace. Either they've proactively said, "Oh, Oliver, I don't think your behaviour's not quite normal," or they've just made themselves available and known that that their door is open to have a kind of conversation. And that's, I think, pretty powerful. But the other thing I was going to say to you just now is the tools and techniques are great. But for me, on my personal journey, the thing that made the biggest difference was recognizing the triggers and knowing when I needed to use the tools. You can learn about all the techniques and tools to the cows come home. But if you can't recognize it yourself, and this kind of relates to what I was talking about, perhaps someone needs to tell you to help you recognize this. But I think it's that for me is the vital first step in like going, I need to not react to this email with the response I'm typing now. I need to stop. I need to breathe. I need to do something different. That for me, for many years, was the biggest problem, that recognition piece.
I think you're absolutely right, Ollie. One of the things that we've shared together is that you wear your heart on your sleeve to a certain extent and you recognize it. One of the fundamental problems across society is that people do not understand mental health. It's not been presented in a way that the normal everyday person can understand it. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide a common understanding and a shared language, because those conversations happen when people speak the same language. And those conversations happen when people have the same understanding. Now, if we think about dental hygiene, we all know how to brush our teeth. We know why we brush our teeth. We know what to do. There's two reasons why. One, we know the consequences if we don't. Therefore, we do it twice a day. Secondly, we were taught to brush our teeth from a very young age. So by the time we were 4 or 5 or 6, it was habitual. We do it every day, regardless. We don't even think about it. Nobody taught me how to look at my mental hygiene when I was a kid. They taught me how to look after my teeth, but they didn't teach me how to look after my brain. And that fundamental understanding that we know how, what, and why to look after our teeth, people need to understand how, what, and why they need to look after the asset, which is their brain, because it is quite an important organ in our bodies. We've got to learn how to look after it better.
And even worse, I guess, we've had technology and gadgets, like you were talking about the mobile phone just now, come along that actually makes the mental health management situation work harder for an individual.
One of the things we talk about, Ollie, is that, technology has evolved a lot faster in the last 20 years than the human brain. It's really simple. The human brain has not evolved to deal with what we're dealing with today, or not the majority of human brains. Obviously, some very bright people out there that can just take it all in and live with it and understand it. But most people, and it's things like this we've been doing for 2 years now, seeing 4 faces, 5 faces in 2D. I'm multitasking right now. I'm thinking, I'm checking out faces, I'm seeing who's talking next. The human brain is not equipped to multitask as well as it is single task. Single tasking is a lot less stressful than multitasking. But actually, every time we sit in front of a screen, we're lucky today because we haven't got spreadsheets, we haven't got PowerPoint presentations, and we're not reading through Word documents. The human brain dealing with that multitude of data coming at it on a 2D screen, it's not evolved to be able to handle that without inducing stress.
So, all right, I've got kind of one sort of last question from a consulting perspective, which is, historically, it is, yes, all of that is well and good. Of course, your brain's the number one asset, all these sorts of things. But that deck needs to be done by 8 o'clock, and I'm going to have a bunch of changes through the night. And if you can't get it done, and you can't take a flight until Friday night at 8 p.m., and I want you back here Sunday night because we got them, in other words, there's like a lip service or greenwashing, or like there's some aspect of this, which is like the big firms are like, yes, we care about our assets, but they had better perform, right? That sort of thing. How do we deal with that, or is that just something we recognize that's part of this industry or related industries, and you have to deal with the resiliency part of it to be able to handle that and be able to bounce back?
You need to be able to weave pieces into your everyday life that will keep your chemical balance in balance. Mm. Because it's like our concentration levels are 45 minutes to an hour, but yet we insist on having back-to-back meetings all day long. So if you start at 8 o'clock, by 8:45, your brain's getting tired, but you're expecting it to perform for another 8 hours. Mm. I think it was mentioned last time, Whynde, I think you mentioned that some organization you're working with are doing 45-minute meetings rather than 1-hour meetings. So those 45 minutes, we don't have the transitions between meetings anymore where we walk from room to room and grab a coffee, and we don't have that chat in the corridor about the weather or what you did last week or who's going out for a drink tonight. We need to actually go, right, we need breaks through the day. Even if it's only 5 minutes between meetings, we need to rebalance the chemistry, because after an hour, our brain is getting tired. And there's some great research evidence out at the moment of back-to-back Zoom meetings for 3 hours and the color changes in the brain regarding stress and other hormones. So it's about taking short breaks between meetings, having those transitions back that we used to have, not doing back-to-back. It's about removing uncertainty. So, Chris, you mentioned on your last one that actually you come up Monday with a double-up meeting, treble-up meeting, tentative. There's a whole lot of uncertainty around that. If you could sort your schedule out on the Friday, you'd probably have a lot more relaxing weekend. Plus, you'd arrive Monday morning knowing what your schedule looked like, so you've removed uncertainty. The other thing you guys mentioned, which is so important on the last one, boundaries.
Yeah.
Having boundaries between home life and work life. Having a lunch boundary, for example. This is my lunchtime. I'm going to take 30 minutes. I'm having those 30 minutes. I'm not working. Taking a bit of time out through the day just to give your brain that time to recover actually makes you a lot more productive, because in meeting 6 at 4 o'clock, you've had 5, 10, 15 minutes between the earlier meetings to refresh, to replenish, to recharge. So your performance over that period throughout the day, you're going to be better rather than brain dead by meetings at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
I think something that's really important to try and take on board is that actually the way that so many people are working at the moment with all this back-to-back and no breaks is actually productivity levels are dropping. And if you want productivity levels to increase, it is about putting in micro breaks. It is about taking care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, you will eventually break, and you can't pour from an empty cup. So it's about how you weave into your daily routines those tiny little things to improve your resilience and your mental health capacity. But it is about small breaks, and that will increase your productivity. If you do what you were talking about on the last one, where you're dipping into 3 meetings, you're not being productive in any of those meetings.
Right. It sounds like to me, the answer to the question then is, the firm is not going to tell you to go do those things or give you the leeway to go do that. You have to take that on yourself. You have to do a recognition, which is, I need a break. I'm only going to schedule 45-minute meetings instead of hour-long meetings, and begin to do some of those things, because otherwise you'll get lost in the machine. As much as the firms want to say, yes, our people are our number one asset, it doesn't always work out that they take care of those assets. So the assets got to take care of themselves, right? I guess. Listen, so we've talked for close to an hour on this. I'm always cognizant of making sure that we make good use of people's time. I kind of want to go with like last thoughts, and we haven't heard from Whynde in 10 or 15 minutes. So.
Well, I'm taking away so many things from this conversation, and I've loved the science and tools behind it. So maybe I'll just this last point that's made. Yes, I do think it is about the boundaries and creating the conditions that work for us. But I also think there's a mindset shift here. Yes, the asset is the important thing. And from the consulting perspective, because I live this grind every day, but we have to understand that it's like a return on investment. It's a big picture. So allowing people to flourish and work in the ways at a normal pace with the right balance throughout their life actually produces more productivity in the overall. And I think that's a key mindset shift to have.
Yeah, I think everyone's on this journey of enlightenment when it comes to looking after themselves. And I think if I had this conversation 5, 6 years ago, I would have given you very different answers. It would have been, it's all about work, and the team needs to kind of work at 110 or 100% all the time. And I think, until you go on that journey of enlightenment, and I think often it takes something going off the rails for that kind of be the wake-up call. Certainly was for me a few years ago anyway. No, this is super important, and I think there is a responsibility, going back to your point, Chris, and there's a responsibility of the firm to recognise that their assets are important, but not just play lip service to that, but actually put the right support. I've touched on mental first aiders, but programs of support where needed, but also the individual responsibility. It's a bit like health and safety. Everyone needs to kind of be responsible for health and safety, and that includes your own sort of mental health and well-being. So yeah, I think that we're all on a journey. I think it's great to see it going into the dialogue that's happening now around this topic is just fantastic. It's being far more normalized, I think, in the last couple of years, perhaps in response to the pandemic and the fact that people have had to deal with the uncertainty that we started talking about at the beginning. But yeah, I'm really positive. I think I see things improving on this topic. But I think, it does come down to taking accountability for it and owning it yourself.
Philip Van Janov.
Baron
Van
Janov. Yeah.
Baron Van Janov.
And Chris,
by the way. It's a true thing. He's a baron of Sealand.
Of Sealand. That's right. That's right. I should be showing that. I mean, Chris, you said this. I think Whynde put a really nice cap on this as well, is that, you are the asset, right? And you are probably working in an environment that doesn't realize how hard it's running the machine. And so they will just ask more and more. And as long as you say yes, you will deliver. And some of us are not really good at figuring out when they need to say no, so that I can recharge the batteries and make it there. And these tricks that we can do, not having your phone. I don't do that. I mean, I don't have my phone. I don't look at my phone in the morning. That's not the first thing I do. I don't have an alarm clock. I just wake up when I wake up every day. But that was me putting the where I needed it to be, so that okay, this encourages me to go to bed on time, because I know I won't wake up on time if I don't go to bed on time, right? And that's how I kind of typically manage that bit. But I think that we all need to realize that the world is trying to get as much out of you as it can. And it's up to you to preserve the you so that you can keep going in this moment. So I think this is a useful conversation. I got lots more questions. We ran out of time before we ran out of questions. So, well, maybe we'll have a part 3, because I think, everything about this to me is increasingly central to the consulting industry and practicing consulting. And, for people, and we have a lot of people that watch us that are entering consulting or new in consulting or lower rungs in consulting. And if you don't do these things, this career, it will consume you. It will absolutely devour you. If you don't make time for yourself, to make time to practice these things to keep yourself resilient, because it will absolutely devour you. But that was my non-medical. I'll leave it to the experts to give us some final thoughts. Haley, Gavin, what are your thoughts?
I'll let the doctor go last so she can finish this off, right? It's really simple as far as I'm concerned. We can all make small changes in our daily routines, and those small changes make a very big difference to enhancing, protecting, maintaining, and when necessary, restoring our mental health and well-being. Small changes make a very big difference.
I think, I think it's been invaluable today talking, but I think often people don't act until it's too late. And I have always, obviously I would be, wouldn't I? I have been about early intervention, and that's just about normalizing these conversations. And the more we just talk openly about it, the more you can learn from people's experiences. There isn't one particular way of doing this. This is about finding what works for you. But I think it's just important to take on board, bits of information and try and figure out what works for you in terms of building your resilience and building up your own toolkit. So hopefully there has been some little nugget that you might take away from today.
Yeah, no, it's been fantastic. And I think, as Phil pointed out, there's so much more here to unpack. But I won't be doing that anytime in the next couple of hours. But right now, listen, I appreciate it. Dr. Haley Dare, Gavin Richardson, obviously Oliver, Phil, Whynde. I'm Chris Lockhart. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And we'll see you next time. Excellent. Thanks, guys.
I wanted the final cut of this thing to count your beers. Just as they come.
Excellent.
Exactly.
Double X. Yeah, that's right.
Your equity. Okay.
And then just call me Haley, please.
Yeah. So first reference
Haley.
with. Yes.
Oh, nice, Chris.
Luckily, they keep coming.
The uncertainty of your professional life on top of it and trying to balance it. And then your professional life includes not just coworkers, but clients.
To your point, and even Haley, what you're saying around the traits and the skills and the assets, I think people are attracted to that. We've had podcasts.
There's a chemical change that happens in your body. So it basically reduces the amount of oxygen that you're taking into your body. So there's the
enhancing, protecting, maintaining, and when necessary, restoring our mental health and well-being. Small changes make a very big difference.
But I won't be doing that anytime in the next couple of hours. But now, that was really good.